and welcome to the Foggy Dew. This is Colin. Well, gang, you seem to think like as school kind of winds up that everything's going to kind of start slowing down. Like as we approached May, June, when the kids were kind of wrapping up school, I'm like, oh, it'll be great. Well, it'll be, we'll be done with all the madness of school. And then it's like all of a sudden you pivot into like the madness of summer. My kids are actually at a religious retreat all week. They're doing like service hours for their high schools. So they're kind of clocking their service hours in, and it's a really great experience for the kids, but it's just like one thing after the other. And I was kind of laughing with my wife, like you think it's going to slow down when they end school, and then it just turns into like this. I'm like a professional chauffeur, I think, at this point. They've got these retreats, they've got a pool party, they've got a barbecue, they've got this, they've got that. To be fair, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I love seeing my kids engaged. I love seeing them do stuff, but it's like, man, summer is not the time to relax, apparently. Summer is the time to just go crazy. So I guess I'll stop talking about my problems with all my headaches driving the kids around, but I really hope you and all your families are having a great start to the summer. And it's so interesting in the backdrop of like this crazy summer, there is politics going on. There is a lot of stuff coming out of the Trump administration, a lot of news coming out, and I guess I'll go ahead and dive into that. So I guess the first update that I'll share from the Trump administration revolves around the SAVE Act. Now, I have spent so much time on the show talking about the SAVE Act. I've talked about the executive order that Trump dropped in parallel to the SAVE Act. There's just a lot of movement by this administration to try to secure our elections. And it's interesting because I've talked about it before with the rhinos. They're just stymieing this bill from going through. For some reason, they don't want to pass it. It's a bipartisan issue. We can't even get a blue senator to jump on board with the SAVE Act. So it's just this interesting dynamic of like legislators not wanting to secure our elections. But I think Trump is kind of working on end arounds like he did the executive order. Well, he got creative again. So I guess for context on this, there is a bill that is now sitting in front of Congress. That bill that is sitting in front of Congress is a $350 billion reconciliation bill. That $350 billion reconciliation bill is actually called Recon 3. Well, what exactly is this reconciliation bill? It's Recon 3. Recon 3, what it is in effect, Recon 3 is a path towards a $1.5 trillion military budget. So you might be like, oh my God, we're spending $1.5 trillion on the military. That's very normal. So they've already got the line item for the $1.5 trillion listed out. It includes the Golden Dome, the Golden Fleet that Trump has been talking about, new F-47s, B-21s. They want to get all of our ammunition stockpiles up to par. Money out of that $1.5 trillion will go into Space Force and drone technology. So it's just this massive bill, but it starts off with this Recon 3, a $350 billion reconciliation bill. So here you have this Recon 3 being considered by the Senate. Well, again, Trump, understanding that that is a huge bipartisan, this Recon 3 as it is, would pass with a huge majority. But what Trump did, it's very smart. What he did is Trump attached the SAVE Act to this reconciliation bill. That's a huge move, especially if you don't pay to like the inside baseball of like what goes on in Congress. So essentially what he did, he attached the SAVE Act onto this Recon 3 bill. What that means is that if Congress ends up passing this Recon 3 bill with the SAVE Act attached, what that would mean is that once it passes Congress, then it would end up at the Senate. Then the Senate would only need 51 votes to pass it. And why is that? Because you've been sitting here under the impression that you needed 60 votes to get the SAVE Act across. Not true. Not every bill needs 60. This Recon 3 is what they call a reconciliation package. Well, reconciliation bills only require a simple Senate majority. So what that means, again, is that you just need 51 votes in the Senate, and that would get you the SAVE Act. And that's totally legal. There's no tricks there. There's no filibuster change. And again, to the layperson, Trump just laid the gauntlet down on the people in the Senate. He attaches the SAVE Act to a reconciliation bill that, again, in a vacuum would pass with a massive majority. It would pass the House with a majority. It would pass the Senate with a majority. So all he's doing is he's attaching the SAVE Act onto this relatively innocuous bill. But again, this SAVE Act now is on a T for the Senate. And if this Recon 3 thing with the SAVE Act attached doesn't pass, you're going to have some pretty serious issues, because what this thing is going to do, this removes all of the excuses from Senate leadership. John Thune is going to be put in a really bad spot if this thing passes Congress, because if these war hawk rhino senators want their war money, then they better pass it. And blue senators aren't any different. If these blue senators want their war money, they better pass it also. You better have somebody on blue come across the aisle on that one. I just said it. Recon 3 is going to pass the House easy. So then what's going to happen is that John Thune is going to be put in a position where he's going to have to whip these votes. You better watch this one closely. Because if this thing fails, if it gets through Congress and then fails in the Senate, there's going to be major league political fallout that occurs. This is a completely brilliant move by Don. It's very, very simple. Again, no procedural change, no talking filibuster. It's just a straight 51 yes. Guys, this thing's got to get passed. It has to get passed. We have to secure our elections. And I'm going to talk more about elections and what's going on in LA in here in a minute. But this is getting to the point of absurdity with the blocking by these red senators. And you're going to see it all now from these people. The red rhino senators that have been stonewalling Thune, Trump, all these guys, you're going to see it all. You're going to see every excuse in the book. Thune, Tillis, John Cornyn, Bill Cassidy, Lisa Murkowski, Mitch McConnell. They're all going to be hung out in the wind here. Because Cassidy and Cornyn already found out. Keep defying the base. If these guys want to keep defying the base, watch what happens. It's just totally fascinating. But again, Donald Trump has put the SAVE Act in a position where a 51 simple majority can pass this. Watch it closely. And I guess pivoting off of that, Donald Trump dropped some other news. Very big news, and I had addressed Iran earlier in the week. Well, what Trump admitted on Tuesday, Wednesday, is that the United States has been taking oil covertly out of Hormuz. Not just a little bit of oil, a lot of oil. So Donald Trump, in a press conference the other day, admitted that over the last few weeks, the United States took out about 100 million barrels of oil out of the Strait of Hormuz. So what Trump had done, he'd actually authorized the military to use tankers and commercial vessels to extract the oil. They used 200 commercial ships to get 100 million barrels of oil. What Trump also admitted in this whole thing is that he said Iran cannot stop them from doing it, and that the U.S. military has total tactical control over the Strait of Hormuz. And look, if that's true, awesome. If he just took out 100 million barrels of oil, then the first thing he needs to do is he needs to go ahead and fill up the strategic reserves. Fill the strategic reserves back up. Joe Biden, the cadaver, had emptied them. That's our safety valve. We need that oil. But I guess looking at this whole thing and understanding that the military and Donald Trump had been covertly taking 100 million barrels of oil out, I guess my first question that I thought about when I read this whole thing is this the reason that you saw kind of this like black hole of news on Iran the last few weeks, the inactivity in the news? Is that why this like appeared like a stalemate? Like we had bombed Iran into submission and we're just like extracting all the oil out covertly? And I guess maybe so. Maybe that's what was going on. And look, to be fair, if we get the oil, great. If we just got 100 million barrels of oil, that's awesome. That should really help with the oil prices domestically. But if this is all bogus and bluster by Trump, then it's just more hot air coming out by the administration on Iran. And it's interesting because Trump keeps moving around here. he gets bad press, and then he comes out with this whole thing. He's like, well, yeah, I know Israel went ahead and bombed Iran, but we've been taking 100 million barrels. It's like a bait and switch or something. But he put out a post on Thursday to kind of be a companion piece of this whole news about the 100 million barrels of oil. And what he said is this. So this is Donald Trump on True Social, quote, "At some point in the not too distant future, we will be taking Carg Island and other oil infrastructure points and assume total control of their oil and gas markets, much like we have with Venezuela, which is working out brilliantly for both Venezuela and the United States of America. Thank you for your attention to this matter, Donald J. Trump." End quote. Okay, great. So we're going to take, so now what he's saying, so now what the administration is saying, now they're saying directly that they're going to be taking Carg Island and other oil infrastructure points and assume total control of Iran's oil and gas markets. I really want this. This is all just bluster from the president. This guy, he's moving the goalpost to get everybody psyched up about this. This guy needs a deal. Close the deal out. Get the nuclear material. If you can get control of the Strait of Hormuz, awesome. If you can neuter Iran, great. I don't know if we need control of Hormuz and we need to be controlling oil and natural gas markets out of Iran. I don't think we need to be doing that 2,000 miles away from home. But again, it's just like one thing after the other coming out of Iran. But again, it seems to me if this is true that he took 100 million barrels of oil out, that is a huge thing. That's a big development. That would be a really good thing. And it would also explain the inactivity in Iran the last couple of weeks. So I'm hoping that that's true. And again, my whole thing with this is wrap it up. We got a country to save. I want to get this whole thing with Iran over with. We need the optics to go away. Let's start the World Cup, man. Let's get the World Cup going in America. Let's run that right up to the July 4th. And then everybody will be in a good mood. Oil prices can come down, and then we can hit the midterms running. But anyway, big news out of the administration this week. Trust me, I'll be watching it. So switching gears, I was talking just a minute ago about voting, what's going on in LA, the SAVE Act, all this stuff. I have gotten a lot of text over the last week or so about this LA situation, and people really want me to go ahead and address what's going on in LA. And to be fair, I wrote this like whole story about the late night vote dumps. And I ended up just throwing the whole thing away because I'm like, I don't want to sit here and go into the minutia of what Spencer Pratt did and like what's going on there with the vote totals and all that. But the vote drops themselves are just a complete joke. It's a total joke. And I think everybody in the United States is like looking at this like with a raised eyebrow now. And I guess let's just set the scene. You have Karen Bass, who's a communist. You've got this ramen lady who's another communist, and there you have Spencer Pratt. So Spencer Pratt, half of Spidey, is running a 30% campaign. In person, day of voting, Spencer Pratt got 28%. So 30% of the electorate voted for Spencer Pratt when they show up in person and pull the lever. Pratt's 30% in person. I said the voting drops are a joke. So after in-person voting ended, all of these mail-in ballots started appearing out of the ether. They had this drop that happened, I guess it was like a couple days ago. They had a drop of 24,000 ballots. I guess it was like 3 days after the election. So 24,000 ballots dropped. 24,000. Zero of that 24,000 were for Pratt. Zero. The math ain't mathin', guys. So a candidate at 30% gets zero of a 24,000 drop. The probability of that occurring, of 0 out of 24,000 for a 30% candidate, the probability of that is in the trillions. It cannot happen. Probabilities in the trillions would typically indicate that it's statistically impossible. And that's really the problem, right? Again, I didn't want to get into the minutia because it's so crazy. Just take that one drop. If the probability of something is in the trillions, what that means is that the layperson, the common observer, doesn't believe this. Nobody with two eyes and two brain cells to rub together believes this, and everybody's watching it. You are watching a theft in real time. You are watching a scam unfold. And the thing that's galling to the average just observer of this, like if you're just a normal person, like going, geez, that seems kind of odd that 24,000 votes dropped and absolutely zero of them went to Spencer Pratt. The problem with it is that you have the media that sits there and asks you for your evidence. Well, where's your evidence that the election was stolen? Where's your evidence? Where's your proof? Seriously, it's so tiresome. You know what my proof is? My proof is that Joe Biden won less counties than Obama and somehow got 16 million more votes. Why don't you, Mr. Media Person, explain that to me? Where did all these votes come from? Where did all these votes come from? This idea of like, well, I know they're slow in LA, but they get it done, and it's a finely tuned watch. This is the same LA County that has how many hospice centers? How many hundreds of millions of fraud? It's absolutely ludicrous to think that LA County in the city of LA is running elections correctly when they've got all this hospice fraud and hundreds of millions of dollars in Medicare fraud. And again, I don't want to get into the minutia, but I want to talk more broadly about it. And I guess the easiest way to talk about this, if you go back to 2019, in 2019, I largely trusted things in America. Maybe you could say I had questions, maybe concerns, but I had this brainwash from growing up in America in the 70s and 80s. It's like this residue of trust. This brainwash, this residue of trust. I just assumed that the United States did things correctly. I grew up under boomers. Boomers told me the greatest generation, the USA is the greatest country on earth. We do everything correctly. We landed on the moon. I believe that, right? I wanted to believe it. So I wanted to believe that we were still the best country on earth, and I could believe everything that I was seeing with my own two eyes. And then unfortunately for me, I saw November 3rd, 2020. And you might not know the date, November 3rd, 2020, but that was election night. So here I am, very excited to watch this election. I'm a student of history, a student of political science. I love watching presidential elections. I love the entire process of the presidential election. And of course, you really have nothing to do. It was a weird year, right? You have COVID raging outside. People are dropping dead at hospitals. And it's just so interesting because I'm sitting here, I buckle in with my popcorn. I'm watching the election on November 3rd. I'm watching Fox News. Everything's going along great. Until what? Until the counting stopped. I'm watching Fox News, and the counting stopped in the 4 states that mattered simultaneously. And it's not just 4 states across the 50. It was the 4 states that mattered. There were 4 states going into the election, in the 2020 election, that were identified as swing states. Those 4 states were the ones that mattered. And just randomly, counting stops in the 4 states that matter. I'm sitting on the couch, and it was like a lightning bolt went through my brain. Like, what am I looking at? And I remember sitting there going, what is happening? Why did counting stop in the 4 states that mattered? It's just insanely weird. And the only way that I can describe it to people, to me, it was like the Matrix glitching. I'm sitting here on the couch watching this totally improbable thing happen in real time. It's totally preposterous. It's something that cannot happen. Voting cannot stop in the 4 states that mattered simultaneously, but it did. So here I am, a trusting person, and I'm watching Bret Baier, Martha MacCallum. How did those 2 people respond? They're the ones covering it. They're the journalists. So this preposterous event happens on election night on Fox News, and Bret Baier, Martha MacCallum, they ignore it. Well, Martha, it looks like counting stopped in the 4 states that mattered. Moving on, we have Joe Blow on the ground at the party at whatever. They're ignoring it. These two air quotes journalists didn't ask one question about why the counting stopped. They didn't stop the broadcast. Well, counting stopped in 4 states that matters. Nothing to see here, folks. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. It was literally the craziest thing I'd ever seen, and not one person on the broadcast made note of it. And I can identify that moment as the moment that I woke up. It was like Neo waking up in the pink pod. I snapped awake. And I can track my whole life to that moment. My life has never been the same since that moment in November 3rd, 2020. Never. It was like reality was a curtain. Reality was a curtain, and that curtain got pulled back for a second. And behind the curtain, I could see these machine gears rolling behind the curtain. I could see the gears moving. And it was like as quickly as the curtain was pulled away, it was snapped back. And the problem with that is I saw the gears. I saw what was going on. And the problem with it, I can't unsee that. And that whole experience of like seeing you have reality 100% and then it just glitches and then it goes back. It was like it was like a malfunctioning of the Matrix. Well, that whole issue of the counting stopping started a process for me mentally. Because I started asking all these questions. My first question is, why did Brett Baer and Martha MacCallum not stop to talk about this? Then my second question, what did I just witness? What just happened here? And of course, what do you do if you're an inquisitive person? You start seeking an explanation. I wanted to understand why the counting stopped in 4 states and why these people on Fox News didn't even find that a noteworthy event. So I wanted truth. I wanted an answer to the questions that I had. Well, guess who wasn't answering my questions? Fox News. And then it starts to appear like Fox News is lying to you, which they do. Fox News is an absolute steaming pile. Fox News had absolutely no explanation. They didn't even want to address it. They just wanted to move on. You can't move on. So what happens is you leave Fox News. Now you're off the reservation. Now I'm off the reservation seeking truth. And what I was doing was I was seeking sources. I was seeking places that could help me identify and help explain to me what I just saw. I just said Neo with the pink pod. In that pursuit of truth, to find an explanation for what I just witnessed, I left the Matrix. That started my journey. And what happens is when you start that journey, you end up finding people that think like you. And as you're finding people that are the same as you, like seeking truth, the problem with it is you find more anomalies. You find more anomalies. Not just present day stuff, but historical stuff. Let me give you another anomaly. An anomaly like Joe Biden winning less counties than Obama. Then you start really seeing the truth. You start seeing mail-in ballot discrepancies. You start witnessing local and state governments lying to you. You start witnessing incompetent oversight. Getting back to my initial point, LA is this phenomenon, but at scale. We've now had 7 years as a population in the United States. You've had 7 years to hear about bogus election results. And I guess thank you to Donald Trump for talking about rigged elections, because now everybody is watching what's occurring here. And this isn't a Republican issue. This isn't a conservative issue. You now have both sides of the aisle declaring invalid election results. But the challenge, I guess, is that everybody, Republican, Democrat, red or blue, everybody knows about mail-in ballots now. Everybody knows about ballot harvesting now. Everybody knows about ballot curing now. Well, I know about all these things. I know about those 3 processes. That process itself is designed for fraud lanes. And not only is it designed for fraud lanes, somehow when those processes are used and the fraud lanes are open, somehow Democrats win every contest. And now you're seeing a counterpunch to that, which would be the SAVE Act, Voting Rights Act, Election Day litigation. It's so interesting because you have both sides of it. You're seeing the whole picture now. For the last 7 years, you've been inundated with corrective issues and remedies for voting. You're seeing the processes at fault. You're seeing the fraud lanes. And the problem with it is nobody believes election results with this format in place. If I see a contest that's being run with mail-in balloting, ballot harvesting, ballot curing, no ID to vote, I don't believe it. Why would anybody believe that format at this point? Like in California, it's illegal to show an ID to vote. There is a growing percentage of the electorate in the United States of America that thinks our elections are totally bogus. And because of that, that is exactly why you see the SAVE Act and even the executive order that Trump issued. That's why you see the SAVE Act having a high level of bipartisan support. Because if the government was serious, if we had a serious government that actually cared about the country, they would fix this. Any government worth its salt that had 50% of the electorate not believing election contest results would fix the problem. Our government, if we were the best country on the planet, we would want to fix that problem. Because the issue with it is you have to have public trust. We have to have public trust, but the opposite is occurring here. I talked about it in the prior segment. We have 0 Democrats that want the SAVE Act. 0. You have 0 blue Democrats that want the SAVE Act on an issue that has 70% support of their own electorate. And Republicans are even worse, right? But it's so interesting because the only conclusion to draw at that point as a voter is that the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, the establishment wings of these, they don't want to fix the issue. So if they don't want to fix the issue, then the obvious question would then arise, why don't you want to fix it? And if you don't want to fix it, either you don't believe it's a problem or you're a beneficiary of the result. And that's the reality here. That's exactly what it is. The elected officials are the beneficiaries of the fraud system. And that's right and left. So people on the right and left don't want to fix the problem. Why? Because they get a huge salary. They get a huge retirement package. They get massive benefits. They get a ton of power. And man, that's a good gig, isn't it? If you were on the gravy train, would you want to vote yourself off that gravy train? Of course not. But it's just so maddening because their behavior is in stark contrast to what the voter is experiencing. The voter is now seeing a fraud center. The voter is now seeing that voting is not secure. Mail-in ballots, ballot harvesting, ballot curing, lanes of structural fraud. So sitting here and telling me, where's your evidence, is pathetic. Where there's smoke, there's fire. A 5-year-old could tell you that. It's common sense, man. And the real problem here, if you want to distill this to brass tacks, the real problem here is the legitimacy of the result. That's the core issue that we're going to be faced with. Legitimacy of the result in the United States of America is what kept this whole thing spinning. I, as a voter, could accept losing an election. I could accept a result before this all happened. Like, I didn't vote for Obama. I didn't vote for Obama, but I could accept that a majority voted for him and wanted him. And why could I accept that? I could accept it because the result was arrived at fairly. The contest was fairly done and my side lost. I can accept that mentally. And the nice thing about America, not only can I accept it, what I would do is I would actually root for the guy that won, even though I didn't vote for him. Why? And it's because I'm an American. I want America to be successful. So if I want America to be successful, then I would even root for a guy that I didn't vote for because he's trying to make America better. And I would root for a guy like Obama, not because I like him, but because the process itself demands respect. Now think about that from the LA mayor deal. Does the LA mayor vote demand my respect? Sorry, no, it doesn't. What's going on in LA deserves scrutiny and it deserves derision. And again, all this mail-in, none of this existed before. Prior to mail-in balloting, most people could accept the result. Mail-in ballots, no ID to vote, no signature required, incomplete voter rolls. Get real, man. Voting is totally out of control to the average observer of this. And it's not just the voting process as a flimsy thing. You have 100 million people that are here in the country that are not citizens. That's the really galling part for me as a born in the USA person with kids that are here. I'm long-term invested in the future of the United States. We have 50 to 70 million illegals here and at least 50 million more people here on work visas or student visas. So I've got 100 million plus people that are not citizens that are here. I've got all these non-citizens. I've got shady state laws. I've got obvious lanes for fraud in actual voting. What that all builds up to is massive distrust in the process. When a media person sits there and says, "Where's your evidence?" That's like trust the science. Well, you don't trust the science of voting? No, I don't. You've done absolutely nothing to earn my trust. And I have two eyes and a brain, and I can see what's going on here. And the issue that we're having right now is that this problem is becoming too large to ignore. And why is that? Is because, again, there are huge swaths of citizens that don't even believe the process anymore. And this LA thing is like throwing gasoline on a fire. The process that we're dealing with right now in the United States is not producing a credible result. It's not credible and it's not verifiable. And unfortunately, I just talked about the media telling you not to believe your own lying eyes. There's no media that's even holding this to account. When I see Kristen Welker from NBC News getting up and telling Donald Trump, "Where's your evidence that voting is rigged?" This is the same NBC News that didn't do anything about the fraud in Minnesota. Kristen Welker was drooling over a guy like Tim Walz while Tim Walz was defrauding the state for hundreds of millions of Medicare fraud. Kristen Welker wasn't doing her job, and to sit around now and say, "Hey, Kristen, why don't you go get the evidence for me? That's your job." I guess we'll have to have Nick Shirley go do that too. The media is not holding anybody to account, and the whole problem again, when the process isn't credible, losing a contest is no longer tolerable to the citizen. It is not tolerable to the citizen because the result was engineered. The result that I'm now watching was manufactured. So if the vote process is not credible and the result manufactured, then the question you would want to ask yourself is, what system are we in exactly? Because a manufactured result doesn't provide the system that we were promised under the founding. Any government or government official that rules without the consent of the governed is illegitimate in this system. This system that we were promised in the textbooks that we all grew up with, this system promises a government by consent of the people. And the question you want to ask yourself is, did LA provide that here? Did the citizens provide consent here? Or did the ruling class provide you a result? Did they provide you the conclusion that they wanted? The thing to think about with elections are in effect a regime change. That's what they are. The regime in the United States changes every 4 to 8 years. So if you look at elections in a really serious political science manner, an election is really a peaceful regime change as opposed to a bloody one. Elections work in this system because the loser thinks next time they can win. That's the key point. They think they can win next time. If the belief exists that you cannot win next time, then you're going to have issues. If you remove my belief that I can win next time, I'm going to have a problem. Because what happens is elections are bloodless regime change. If I don't believe the result and I believe I'm being provided a manufactured, engineered result, then what you are doing is you are now inviting a bloody regime change to occur. And that is the ultimate result. And JFK nailed that. I'm going to give you a quote from JFK. Here's JFK, quote, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable," end quote. That's exactly right. An election is a peaceful revolution. It is a peaceful transfer of power. If you are making that impossible, if you make a peaceful revolution impossible, then you are making a violent revolution inevitable. Nothing's new, guys. Election theft is as old as time. We've got bad media, election theft, fraud lanes, illegals everywhere. That's a toxic brew, man. Anyway, I've had so many people asking me about LA, but those are my thoughts on it. Again, you've got to pass the SAVE Act. You've got to get this executive order across the line. We cannot have this type of chicanery going on in national elections. You can't have it going on in LA. Anyway, those are my thoughts on LA. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I'll be watching the whole thing. So I've been watching something else really closely, and I guess the best way to start this whole, diatribe is that in college, I actually took a class specifically on Irish history. And that class on Irish history that I took in college was probably the best class I ever took. The class on Irish history was actually taught by a guy named Kirby Miller. And I would seriously urge you to look at any of his books. His name's Kirby Miller. Kirby Miller is the leading Irish historian in the U.S. But if you look at Ireland and the Irish people have been occupied for a millennia. You have so many variables that go on in Ireland. You've got Protestants, Catholics, you've got the British occupation, you've got the IRA, Sinn Féin, the Foggy Dew, the Easter Rising, the Troubles. You have a millennia of violence and political contest. And if you look at Ireland even today, Ireland is still split and occupied today. Northern Ireland is still largely controlled by Britain. So when you step back and look at the big chessboard, Ireland is a key piece of that. And why would that be? First off, in Ireland, you have this whole mass immigration situation. All Western countries over the last 10 years, really the last 5 years, it accelerated, but you've had all these Western countries that were reverse colonized. And reverse colonized is the best way to think about it. They were invaded. You had the United States, England, France, Ireland. All of these countries started importing half the third world. Well, they started importing half the third world, and part of the reason given was that these states had conquered other lands. Like that France, the UK, the US, that these states, these nations had gone and colonized and exploited the third world. And opening up their borders now would heal these historical wounds of conquest. That entire premise of historical conquest and occupation, that premise could work until you look at an Ireland. Why? Ireland never conquered anyone. Ireland was conquered. Ireland was occupied. So the question you want to, and they're still occupied, and the question that you would ask yourself about Ireland is, why would the Irish people then, if they didn't colonize anybody, why would they need to absorb millions of refugees? Are the Irish people, is Ireland, are they not allowed to have their own state and border? Because if you look at the Irish people, they're an injured people historically. Shouldn't this idea of we were colonized, we were occupied, shouldn't that kind of sympathy extend to the Irish people as well? Of course it doesn't. And why is that? Well, the answer is obvious. Part of it is because Ireland is part of the EU, which is run by globalists. The globalists, with their open borders policy and their suicidal empathy, they forced this on Ireland. So EU partially is to blame for this, but this also exposes the real truth of migration. The real truth of this mass immigration into Western countries is not about historical equity. It's about destroying the West. This whole idea of sending in tens of millions of illegals from third world countries into the West is really about destroying Western culture and the historical nation state. So what's occurring is this mass immigration is being accomplished legally. It's a legal invasion. It is reverse bloodless colonization. Laws that have been written by these benevolent nation states, these Western nation states, laws have been weaponized. Voting has been weaponized. And if you look, even go back to World War I, World War II, the greatest strength of the West was its morality, its foundation. The West's own morality was weaponized against it as well. Morality in some way has been replaced by self-loathing. People in the UK, in France, in Ireland, and even in the US, citizens were taught to hate their own culture. They were taught to hate their own government. They were taught to be ashamed of it. Well, you guys have been enslaving people for a millennia. You're just bad, racist people, all this other stuff. They teach you to be ashamed of your past. The other issue here with Ireland, like if you look at Ireland specifically, the second issue with Ireland is Ireland itself. Ireland fought people trying to colonize it for 1,000 years. The Irish are no strangers at trying to repulse invaders. The Irish are no strangers to fighting occupiers. And the thing about it, this is going on this is within living memory. The Troubles in Ireland ended in the 90s. This isn't 1,000 years ago. The Irish people know how to organize as insurrectionists and fighters. There are plenty of old dog fighters left in Ireland from the Troubles. And those old fighters, they know the old ways. They know where the guns are. And these people aren't stupid. They know the score here. So if you look at what's going on in Ireland with all these immigrants coming in, you have the immovable object in the Irish people and their own historical background of being people that are willing to resist invasion. And then you have that immovable object meeting the immovable force, which is these immigrants coming in. You have the Irish people and their history versus the invaders. And if you look at this whole thing, if you look at what's going on with mass immigration into these European countries, the Irish people were always in a better position than England citizens or French citizens. Because if it's ever going to pop off, it's going to pop off in Ireland. Ireland was always the canary in the coal mine for Europe on this whole issue of mass immigration. And I guess you might be sitting asking yourself, like, what happened and why is this guy talking about Ireland? Well, about a week ago, this Sudanese migrant that had gone into Ireland. So you have this Sudanese migrant in Ireland, in Belfast. This migrant, this Sudanese guy, tries to decapitate a Belfast man in the middle of the street the other day. And just as a matter of fact, this Sudanese guy is a Muslim. So again, you have a Muslim Sudanese migrant attacking a Belfast man in broad daylight on a street in Northern Ireland. So you have all these citizens sitting around watching this atrocity, and you have the government and the police saying, well, this isn't terrorism. The Irish people have reached a breaking point. Ireland is popping off right now, and good for them. If you look over, the canary in the coal mine just died. It's sitting in its cage. It's dead. Here's the core issue. Government leaders in Ireland allowed in violent migrants. They did not vet these people correctly. They just allowed anybody to come in. That same government gave migrants tax money. So you have migrants eating the citizens of Ireland's tax money. You have these same migrants that nobody wanted taking housing, food, healthcare. These people are not asked to assimilate into the culture. If you, a citizen, an Irish citizen, protest against this madness, then the government of Ireland is going to call you a racist nationalist. And the problem with all this, the hour is late in Ireland, because I can tell you right now, violence is coming. Violence is coming not just in Ireland, but in England, in France, in all of these places. And the United States is not immune to this whole thing. And of course, look, if you're an Irish citizen and you've got some Sudanese Muslim trying to decapitate someone in your streets, man, I'm going to pop off. Northern Ireland right now is descending into violence. There are masked rioters on the loose in Northern Ireland. And what there are is nationalists. So you have nationalists right now in Northern Ireland burning cars, attacking police, marching and protesting. Words have failed in Ireland. The citizen feels like they have no address. When words fail, the sword usually follows. George Washington said it best. Here's a quote by George Washington, quote, "When the government betrays its people, the people will govern themselves," end quote. That's exactly right. The government of Ireland has failed its own people. The government of Ireland are the ones that created this powder keg. And now what's happening is that nationalists are going after migrants and their families, which is totally obvious. And it's interesting because the same government that created this whole issue is now calling for calm. We need some peace. It's too late, man. Here's the distilled truth for the people in Ireland and for the government of Ireland. History is not going to be ignored much longer. Mankind historically is especially brutal. Man is prone to barbarism. Mankind is a barbarian, killing, rape, stealing. Those were always the historical norms. Attila the Hun didn't have committees. Genghis Khan wasn't worried if you had a case of the Mondays. Western society pulled mankind out of that barbarism. We use words in Western society, not violence. And what we did when Western nation states were developed, we created laws to continue that process. This is exactly why in Western countries, this is exactly why we have states and laws. We have states and laws that are designed to prevent the barbarism that mankind is subject to. So these states that we developed on the West, these states are now importing people who don't share that worldview. They don't understand it. Sudan is a barbaric third world hellhole. Beheadings occur there every day. Well, in the West and in Ireland, the people give their consent to the state. The elected leaders of these states make laws by consent of the governed. Those laws must be enforced. Well, sorry to tell these guys, but enforcement of the laws requires physical force. The states are given the citizenry's permission to use lawful force. That's the social compact. That's the social compact. What is happening in Ireland is that the state has abdicated their responsibility in this deal. The state has failed. Ireland is a failed state if it's not going to enforce its own laws that are designed to protect its own citizen. This cascade of failures by the state to enforce laws, to use the force which they are legally given, pushes the responsibility of violence to the citizenry. Citizens are now doing what the state would not. In Ireland and Belfast are unfortunately living in this nightmare now. The state allowed the invaders in. The state won't protect the people. Well, what's occurring is obvious. The people are now responding. My prayers are with the Irish nationalists. They're being forced into this. I don't think they want anything to do with this. But unfortunately, you have to fight now or you're going to be suffocated and killed. Native Irish have every right here. And the funny thing about, I've said it before, I think on the show, but you have to really wonder at what point America starts arming political dissidents in Europe. Because if you're like a rural English farmer, they're coming for you, man. Your farm is going to be in hot gear pretty soon. It's exactly like what happened in South Africa. The Boers kill the Boers. But do we start arming political dissidents? That is becoming well within the realm of possibility. And I guess the only thing you want to think about here in America, be thankful for the Second Amendment. Because I can promise you that the more I see what's going on in Ireland, the UK, France, and all that, the more thankful I am there's a Second Amendment. Because I can promise you, if there was some dude beheading a guy in the street here in the States, it would get taken care of real quick. But this entire situation about Ireland made me think about an Irish song, and not the Foggy Dew. And I have to address Foggy Dew is actually a song, but there's another song very similar to it. And I actually wanted to call this show The Patriot Game because it's like one of my favorite songs. But Foggy Dew was the compromise. But The Patriot Game is an Irish ballad. So The Patriot Game is a song about a boy named Fergal O'Hanlon. Fergal O'Hanlon, this Irish kid, was born in 1936 in Ballybay. He was a Catholic, a staunch Irish Republican. Well, at the tender age of 16, Fergal O'Hanlon wanted to join the IRA. He believed in the value of freedom. He wanted Ireland to be free. He wanted to join the IRA because the IRA was trying to free Ireland from British occupation. Here's a 16-year-old kid with that worldview. A 16-year-old kid who played soccer, was thinking about becoming a priest, but he had this burning flame for freedom. No different from our founding fathers. They had to use violence to get us freedom here in the States. Well, here's Fergal O'Hanlon, just a kid, and at 20, he joined the IRA. So Fergal O'Hanlon joins the IRA at the age of 20, and a year later, he's dead. The IRA had attacked this police barracks. It was in 1957. So at the time, tensions with the IRA and the Royal Police had deteriorated to like this critical point. So the IRA had planned this whole raid on this constabulary. Well, now what you had is you had a 20-year-old kid dead. Fergal O'Hanlon, a 20-year-old kid dead. His brain had been filled up with patriotism, love for his country, love for his home. His home was being occupied by the British. And he decided to act. He decided to act, and he was shot dead at 20. You think his family regretted that? His mother stayed committed to the IRA after her son was killed. Fergal O'Hanlon's mother maintained that her son was an Irish hero. There is still a marble monument at the place where Fergal O'Hanlon died. That kid, Fergal O'Hanlon, is considered a hero of Ireland. He's a hero, but he was also a kid put in a bad situation. And after that kid died, they found in his journal, in his journal, he wrote this, quote, "I know of no way freedom can be obtained, maintained, except by armed men." End quote. I know of no way freedom can be obtained, maintained, except by armed men. O'Hanlon was right. Freedom takes force. It takes physical force. The government exerts it, or the people will, and that's where Belfast is right now. But it's interesting with Ireland because Fergal O'Hanlon is not alone. The Irish people have a long history of fighting. They have people like Fergal O'Hanlon to look at. They have civic and national pride. Again, the heroes of places like Ireland are people like Fergal O'Hanlon. A simple kid with a burning love for his country that went and sacrificed his life for freedom. Ireland is your canary in the coal mine. Everyone is watching this, and I personally am, again, praying for the Irish. But man, watch Ireland. It's going to pop off. Okay, I'll go ahead and wrap the show up. If you like the show, please go ahead and tell a friend about it. If you would, please follow us on Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram at Foggy Dew Daily. If you have questions for the show, please go ahead and email us at foggydew95@gmail.com. But in the meantime, I'd ask you to say a prayer, ask questions, and stay vigilant. This is the Foggy Dew, signing off.